from the wild, from the rain and the stone, where the wind has no name and the traveler's alone. There's warmth in the fire and truth in the tale of the watcher who walks where the bold-hearted fail.
He carries no sword, yet the darkness gives way to the lantern he lifts at the end of the day. He stands on the watchtower, still and unswayed, where the lost find a path through the fog and the fray. Pilgrims Grey, oh steward of lands, you carry the light in your weather-worn hands. A tale at the hearth, a guide through the night. You open the gate between the wrong and the right.
Well, greetings, pilgrims. Greetings, greetings, greetings. The cold wind rattles the shutters at the Pilgrims Grey Tavern as dusk settles, and inside a single lantern casts flickering gold across rough-hewn beams. And a small group of travelers huddles around the hearth, weary from the road, yet eager for truth. The innkeeper, a gray-bearded sage with kind eyes, gently polishes an oak table. He leans in, voice low and resonant. As if sharing a guarded secret in the dancing shadows, he begins tonight's tale. Gather close, friends. Tonight, I uncork a dusty bottle of forbidden history. The very transcript of Myron Fagan's 1967 lecture, The Illuminati and the Council on Foreign Relations. More than half a century old, its warnings echo eerily into our present time. Listen well, for by lantern's glow, we will read Fagan's own words and then parse their meaning. You will hear of an age-old conspiracy, a devilish plot spanning centuries, and see how its tendrils entwine on our modern world. And there will be whispers of one-world government, wars scripted like plays, puppet masters, and traitors in high places. But fear not, we at the Pilgrims Grey Chronicles walk in both wisdom and humor, and we'll shine light on these shadows and connect the dots through history, and even share a wry aside or two, just to keep our wits about us. And by night's end, we'll pull back the curtain, not just on mortal men, but on unseen powers that truly pull the strings. So, if you all will, welcome to Pilgrims Grey Chronicles. Robert Clark, your host. Settle in by the fire. The hour is late, and the truth is afoot. Let us begin. So, Myron Fagan, in his famous 1967 lecture. By the way, this was, I had most of this prepared a while back when we were doing our series on the Council of 300, the Black Nobility, and so on, and other things. And I feel it's important because there are no good politicians anymore in my eyes. Some of them may do good, but it's only the kind of good that you would have a Luciferian doing, only to garner your trust, only to eventually stab you in the back at some point. And so, with that being said, I give these kinds of things to you so that you can see that wiser men than us, than I, have seen this coming for some time. And I went through 30 pages of that transcript and took out what I could to try to not make the show, almost 2 hours again. I'm trying to cut down on that because I have responsibilities here and to spend more time with my wife and things of that nature. But I do feel it's important to get the important points across. And it is important to know what they knew back then and to watch it coming into fruition today. These men warned us, and we should take heed. I think the Lord gives discernment in great quantities to some. And it's up to us to be discerning, to take heed to such things. So Myron Fagan opens his lecture with a bold claim, right? For those of you who are familiar with it, that the United Nations is not the peace-loving global forum we are taught, but rather the crux of a diabolical one-world government scheme. Basically, the Novus Ordo Seclorum that you see on your dollar bill, a new order for the ages. Not a good one. We know this as Christians, but some of you aren't Christians who are listening, and that's fine. I have plenty of friends who are not Christian. I wish they would be, but I would never force it upon somebody. You have your own thoughts. The Lord has given you a will that is free. You can receive him when he comes searching for him or reject him. That's completely up to you. I advocate that he is the person who made everything in this universe. And while you may not fully understand him, it's, I think he does love us and wants us to love him back. That's what it's all about. It's not about fire insurance. It's not about, oh, well, if there's a loving God, why does he allow such evil? Because you're free. And men who are free will either love or do evil. One day that will all be set right. But if he were to have never allowed it to occur, there would be those who, of course, would say, well, we were never free to choose anything otherwise. Well, we are right now. And how do you like it? I don't. I would like to have a free will that is free to choose within a range of good things. But that's not how things went. And we are learning what true love really is. And you can blame God all you want, I guess. I don't. I think he's a good God. And the reason the world sucks is because of us and because of the other rebels in the other realms who decide that their way is better than his. So, enough of my delaying. Sorry. I just had to get that off my chest. So, in this, he laments that most Americans don't have a clue. And isn't that obvious? To many of us. Not to this listening audience, you guys clearly have a clue. But from living in this world, most don't. We see the NPCs roaming around, right? And we should pray for them and help wake them up. Anyway, precisely because powerful conspirators control our news media. We know this, and they shape our perceptions. In Fagan's own words, he says, and I quote, "The questions of how and why the United Nations is the crux of the great conspiracy to destroy the sovereignty of the United States and enslave the American people within a UN one-world dictatorship is a complete and unknown mystery to the vast majority of the American people. The reason for this unawareness is quite simple. The masterminds behind this great conspiracy have absolute control of all of our mass communications media, especially television, the radio, the press, and Hollywood," unquote. Now, those words hit hard. Fagan is basically saying, wake up, right? I'll go back to the slideshow in a minute here. We'll go back to me for the moment. Just because. And anyway, he's basically saying, wake up. The UN is a trap. Its lofty promises of world peace, hides a scheme to erase American sovereignty and impose a global dictatorship. Let's move that right here so I can see better. Gotta have my notes. My brain isn't what it used to be. I can't remember names and dates, so I have to have my notes. But I put it right in front of the camera so that I can see all of you. And so why don't people see it? It's because the plotters manage the news. We're familiar with Operation Mockingbird, and they feed us only what they want us to believe. And remember, this was spoken in 1967, before the internet, when TV networks and newspapers were king. And Fagan saw that even back then, a handful of elites could brainwash the people by controlling information. How much more so now that they control social media and have all of your info and can put whatever the algorithm says to put in front of your face so that the chemicals in your body keep you addicted to your Black Mirror all day. So Fagan drives the point home by highlighting the Korean War fought under a UN flag and the Vietnam War raging as he spoke, and conflicts never officially declared by Congress yet costing American lives. These wars, he says, were not accidents of geopolitics, but part of the plot. They softened America up, drained us in blood and treasure, all to nudge us closer to accepting the UN's authority. Not outright initially. They never, ever take big bites. Hardly ever. And when they do, you should beware, because if they're taking big bites, it's because they've created a huge problem, right? The only time they can ever move in big bites and rapidly and do things that would normally wake people up is if they've created some sort of catastrophic thing that where you're begging for help, and so you don't even notice that they're taking a big bite. Although I think 2020 backfired on them. So, as Fagan puts it, even the leaders we trusted to protect us were betrayers taking orders from a hidden cabal. Now, we've gone over some of those, right? The Council of Nine, the Black Nobility, Council of 300, all of these people whose the family names you've heard of are ones they want you to hear of, right? Like the Rothschilds and such. There are names that you're never going to hear. Simple as that. And I imagine anybody who leaks those names disappears before they ever get to leak it. So he's quoted as saying, "All you mothers of the boys who died at Korea and are now dying in Vietnam, you need to know that our so-called leaders in Washington, whom we elected, supposedly, to safeguard our nation and our Constitution, are the betrayers, and that behind them is a comparatively small group of men whose sole objective is to enslave the whole world of humanity in their plot of one world government." And I don't think it's humans that are behind it. Not completely. They have to be somewhat, because we have the birthright here, and we have to secede our control willingly to them. And more often than not, we do. Because those people who cooperate are given positions of power, money, and authority. And that's obviously far too tempting for many men. Right? I mean, look what happened to the first men in Middle Earth, right? Their whole island sank because of this very reason, deceived by Sauron. So that is a startling accusation. Essentially, that presidents and congressmen from the United States were and are selling us out, working for a satanic one-world clique. It's the kind of statement that would get you labeled a kook or conspiracy theorist outright, especially back then. Yet here we are decades later, and much of what Fagan warned us of has only become increasingly obvious. Endless wars with ambiguous goals, Czech U.S. leaders of both parties pushing international entanglement, check. Calls for Americans to surrender a bit more sovereignty for the greater good of global governance, check. The UN itself has grown from a peacekeeping talk shop into a behemoth with its own agendas, pushing global programs, right? Agenda 21, 2030. The only reason it's 2030 now is because they want us to believe that a stick was thrown in the spokes. And anyway, these programs reach right down into local communities. And Fagan's opening salvo sets the stage. The UN is the Illuminati's baby, and mass media is its nursemaid. To understand how we got to such a perilous point, he tells us we must rewind the clock a couple of centuries back to the birth of this satanic plot. And by the way, that doesn't mean that I believe that Satan's little season occurred in 1776, for those of you listening who are little seasoners. But we are going back to 1776. So, now to give you a clear picture of this plot, we must go back to its beginning, Fagan says. Leading us to the 18th century, he identifies the mastermind, Adam Weishaupt, the Bavarian professor who founded a secret society called the Illuminati in 1776. Now, Weishaupt's Illuminati, Fagan explains, was bankrolled by the powerful house of Rothschild, or Red Shield, and its ultimate goal was nothing less than world domination. Fagan describes the birth of this beast. Quote, "This satanic plot was launched back in 1760s when it first came into existence, under the name of the Illuminati. This Illuminati was organized by one Adam Weishaupt at the behest of the newly organized house of Rothschild. Naturally, the Rothschilds financed that operation, and every war since then, beginning with the French Revolution, has been promoted by the Illuminati, operating under various names and guises. Seldom do they use the name Illuminati." So, right out of the gate, Fagan tags the Illuminati as warmongers par excellence, right? Every major conflict from the late 18th century onward, the French Revolution, the World Wars, you name it, and the ones they're trying to foment now between Islam and Israel, he attributes to this clique, often operating behind front organizations. When their original Illuminati order was exposed and banned in Bavaria in the 1780s, they didn't vanish. They simply slithered underground under the closest rock, rebranding and resurfacing under new names, just like MK Ultra. Oh yeah, we decided to not do that anymore. Right. You know as well as I do, they're still doing it under a different name. So over in Europe, they infiltrated Freemason lodges and other secret societies, and crucially, after many decades, they found a new base of operations, the delightful United States of America. Yay for us, right? So according to Fagan, America was always the grand prize. By the early 20th century, the conspirators said, and I'm sorry for that noise, my wife loves her new tractor we got her a couple of years back. And she likes nothing more than to listen to podcasts, including mine, believe it or not, her husband's, while she is on her tractor. And we have to catch the fields when the grass starts getting tall, because some of the grass that we don't want will begin to seed if we don't. And we've been trying to keep up with it to keep the yard like an Irish hillside. How do you like that, Ivan, if you're listening? So it looks beautiful out there. Maybe someday I'll take some pictures of it and put it on the show so you can see the acreage where we live, and you can see our goats, our goat army marching across the field with our wonderful Pyrenees. Well, we used to have two Pyrenees. One passed away last year, sadly, and she was the best dog you could ever have imagined. And we have the one left, and he's great too. He's part Pyrenees and part lab, and he's a bit goofy. The Pyrenees, for humans, her name was Samson. I know it's a male name, but it was a very young daughter that named her. And so Samson was as friendly as could be to every human that would approach our fence. If you were a dog or some other creature that did not belong in the field, she became a raging Kodiak bear and would rip it to shreds, whatever it was. And so we always felt safe that our horses, and which we no longer have, and our goats were safe from harm, and none have ever been taken out that way. So apparently it works. Sorry, I got sidetracked again. Okay. Where were we? America, the grand prize. And by the early 20th century, the conspirators set up shop in the U.S. under a very respectable sounding name. Are you ready for it? I think you've already guessed it, right? Its initials are CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. And he minces no words here. Here's a quote. Immediately after World War I, they set up what they called the Council on Foreign Relations, commonly referred to as the CFR. And the CFR is actually the Illuminati in the United States. Its hierarchy, the masterminds in control of the CFR, to a great extent, are descendants of the original Illuminati conspirators. But to conceal that fact, most of them changed their original family names to American-sounding names. So, to Fagan, the CFR, founded in 1921, is essentially Illuminati Central on American soil. The same old plot in a slick new disguise. And isn't it interesting that even today, the CFR remains extremely influential? I mean, how many secretaries of state, defense, CIA directors, bankers, and media moguls have been CFR members? Pretty much all of them, right? All of them. And these are the very descendants Fagan spoke of, though they now sport anglicized last names and Ivy League degrees. He even gives an example. The Dillon family, CFR elites in the 60s, were originally Leposki before they Americanized their name. It's a small detail that drives home a larger point. The conspirators adapt. They're like chameleons, right? See chameleon lying there in the sun, all things to everyone. Run, run away. Great song, great band, Slade, love them. So they hide in plain sight, often behind prestigious or benign facades, whether that be philanthropy, liberalism, or global cooperation. Fagan actually issues a warning about terminology. He notes that the enemy has, quote, seized upon the word, liberal as cover-up for their activities, since it sounds so humanitarian. Even in 1967, he saw how language was being weaponized, and it's highly effective. It's something we are all too familiar with today. How many destructive agendas are sold to us with feel-goodish labels, right? The Family Leave Act, the Patriot Act. He basically cautions, beware those who loudly parade as liberals or humanitarians. They might be Reds, communist, or globalist in sheep's clothing. Frankly, beware of all of them. I don't feel like any politician in this day and age can be trusted. So now one might ask, how did this Illuminati cabal actually spread its tentacles into nations and institutions? Fagan provides a blueprint of their methods, and it reads like a playbook for subversion. Of course it does. So we've got 5 ways here, basically. He actually had more, but I had 30 pages of transcript to go through. So one was infiltration of secret societies and institutions. The Illuminati infiltrated Freemasonry, creating secret cells within all secret societies. Only those Masons who proved their godlessness, or basically their sociopathic behavior, and internationalist bent were initiated into the Illuminati inner circle. Look, the vast majority of people who are part of the Masonic order all joined to get a one-up in the community. They have no idea what's really going on at the top. And some might not care. And those will probably be the sociopaths that are moved up the ranks. Generally, people who do care probably don't stay there very long. They begin to sniff out that something ain't right. But maybe they stay for the money, right? Because they promote their own. So, Fagan recounts how Weishaupt even recruited a prominent Scottish Rite Mason, John Robison, under false pretense and gave him the Illuminati's revised plans. Robison later blew the whistle in 1798 with his book, Proofs of a Conspiracy. But the European elites ignored him, right? Because he was a scumbag American, just like all the rest of us. I mean, at least in their eyes. I don't think we're scumbags. How about another image back here? Yeah, that's his rare recording, if you can see it. That's his 3D CD set right there. For those of you who can't see it, I'm showing his original volume 1, 2, and 3, which winds up creating roughly 30 pages of notes, just for the record. I'm not trying to brag or nothing. It was quite a task, I must say. So then we have number 2, bribery and recruitment of leaders. They would find corruptible men in positions of power or rising to power, pay them off or seduce them with promises, and use them as stooges. And we'll see this method in action in the US, but it was true in Europe as well. Many a monarch or minister was either compromised or coerced to serve the one world scheme, right? A la Epstein, blackmail, you name it. And then third, we have control of communication. Control the press, theater, books, any means of shaping public opinion and the narrative. We've already heard Fagan on mass media control. Later, we'll dive deeper into how they co-opted modern media and Hollywood. And then 4, fomenting social division, right? divide and conquer. They seek to fracture societies along religious, racial, or class line, any line. They don't care as long as you're divided. They'll even have you arguing about sports teams. Anything to take your eyes off them. And it makes you, the populace, easier to manipulate. For instance, Fagan points out that communism, a key Illuminati creation, was a tool to inflame class hatred and destabilize nations from within. And by the way, it works. Every time you use a phrase, somebody should pay what they deserve, or pay, what does that guy need to earn $2 billion? Well, it's none of your business how much somebody earns. It's there. I said it. It's none of your business. If you don't like the fact that a guy's earning that much at a company, don't buy from them. Don't work for them. But as far as earning, what somebody earns, what my neighbor earns is none of my business. And what taxes he pays, completely his business. So if you're into that, then you've already fallen for the class warfare thing. All right, so the fifth one, destroying faith and morals. Erode the Judeo-Christian moral fabric, undermine religion, especially Christianity, and thus weaken the spiritual resistance of society. After all, a godless population may more readily accept an all-powerful state or dictator in place of God, a state messiah. So, keep these tactics in mind because Fagan will illustrate each one with historical examples. Nothing was off limits for the Illuminati. Bribery, blackmail, infiltration, propaganda, revolutionary terror, war, all were just means to their end of a one-world government under their control, of course. And at the top of this pyramid, from the 1770s onward, sat the Rothschild dynasty, the general bankers of the Illuminati who pulled the purse strings and thus the puppet strings. And Fagan also gives a fascinating glimpse into early American history that you won't find in your standard textbook. He claims the Illuminati had agents in America as far back as the Revolutionary War era, the 1770s. But George Washington was more than a match for them. In other words, our first president recognized and opposed the Illuminati influence. Washington actually wrote letters in the 1790s about the Illuminati infiltrating American lodges. But after Washington's time, the plotters tried again during the Civil War in the 1860s. So, and Civil War intrigue, Fagan stated that Judah P. Benjamin, the Confederate Secretary of State, was a Rothschild agent, and that there were Rothschild agents in Lincoln's government too, who attempted to get the U.S. mired in debt to European bankers. Lincoln thwarted those schemes, famously printing greenbacks and refusing high-interest loans, thus earning the eternal hatred of the international bankers. By the way, this doesn't mean that Lincoln was necessarily a good guy, because he did a lot of crappy tyrannical things. So according to Fagan, this is a key reason why Lincoln was assassinated. And it probably was. Anybody who doesn't cooperate with the central bankers gets axed, like Lincoln, Gaddafi, you name it, Saddam Hussein. He notes that John Wilkes Booth belonged to a secret group, never fully revealed, by the way, and draws a parallel to President John F. Kennedy's assassination, who also didn't play ball like he should have, still being an unsolved mystery, insinuating that Kennedy, too, crossed the same powerful interests, which he did. Chillingly, Fagan in '67 said he was sure the truth about JFK's murder would not remain a mystery for long. Yet, here we are, all these years later, still speculating about CIA memos and second shooters. It seems the cover-up runs deep. Well, really it doesn't, because we now know that our CIA did do this. So, but nobody blinks an eye about it. Most Americans probably don't know that our own government killed JFK. And it had everything to do with upsetting the central bankers and threatening to expose and get rid of them. I could read the Kennedy speech, but there are some people who believe he's still alive. I don't know. I think they truly off people. Look, maybe they do fake their deaths, but the point is they're no longer in power, right? They blew it and had to be removed and replaced with somebody else who was cooperative with the bankers. So, by the end of the 19th century, the Illuminati's first attempt at a one-world government, the Congress of Vienna, 1815, had failed, thwarted by the Russian Tsar Alexander I. If you recall, after Napoleon's defeat, they tried to set up a global League of Nations of sorts in 1815, but Russia balked. Nathan Rothschild then infamously vowed revenge on the Tsar. The conspirators learned from their failures. They realized the United States would be the decisive arena for their plans to impose a world government. America could not remain free and sovereign. It would either have to be subverted from within or driven to its knees by war. And so enters the next major character in Fagan's saga, Jacob H. Schiff, the man dispatched by the Rothschilds to orchestrate the subversion of America. And boy, was he effective. Let's see, oh, there's Myron himself. Nifty neato, huh? There's your currency. Gotta love it. So, in Fagan's telling, Jacob Schiff is the arch-agent of the Illuminati on American soil in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Schiff, born in a Frankfurt ghetto in 1847, was handpicked and groomed by the Rothschilds for a very special mission. He arrived in the United States in the early 1870s with specific orders to infiltrate and take over key American institutions. So because of lack of time, you guys get to hear all my foibles. So when I trip over my lips, I leave it in instead of editing it out. Anyway, as fake, that's how real we are here, right? We're just real. As Fagan puts it, Schiff came to America to carry out 4 specific assignments. So let's list these 4 directives, because this is literally the Illuminati game plan for the U.S., formulated in the 1870s, but alarmingly, absolutely relevant today. So first of all, control the money system. Acquire control of America's money system. Right? Money is the lifeblood of any nation. Hijack the banking and currency, and you hold the nation by the throat. This was priority numero uno for Schiff. By the way, they succeeded. Have you not noticed? We run by debt. Number 2, and our money is paper. It's not backed by anything any longer. Another plan of theirs. Highly successful. Number 2, install puppet politicians. Find desirable men who, for a price, would be willing to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into high places in our federal government, our Congress, and the U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies. In short, infiltrate the government at every level with puppets who dance to the Illuminati tune. Bribe them, blackmail them, whatever it takes, but get your loyal agents in position of power. Folks, I'm just going to tell you right now, this was back in the 60s. They're all compromised. You don't have a good politician in there anymore. If they're doing good, it's most likely only to build up a false sense of trust so they can throw something even worse at you later. I hate to be that cynical, but we're so far along now. Kennedy might have been one trying to stop it, but he was taken out. And they've had decades now to put everybody in place. And now they're just playing a Hegelian dialect. Oh, but these are the good white hats over here. Right. They're 2 corrupt wings on the same bird. They're all playing you for fools. So number 3, foment racial strife. Create minority group strife throughout the nations, particularly between whites and blacks. Divide Americans against each other by exasperating racial tensions and every other conceivable fault line you can think of. But race is a good one. But like I said before, they'll do anything. Pro-life, abortion, the Giants, the Yankees. They don't care as long as you're arguing and divided, because then you're easier to manipulate and rule because you're not paying attention to what's important. And then destroy religion, especially Christianity, like we said earlier. Create a movement to destroy religion in the United States with Christianity as the chief target. Undermine America's spiritual foundation and moral unity, because a godless, morally confused society will more readily embrace tyranny and look to world powers for salvation. You need look no further than following stupid lines through Walmart, being funneled into one entry because they put barricades all over the place, which is why I don't go to Walmart anymore. I haven't since 2020. And strapping diapers to our faces. So, and every time I think of it, I think of the people who went around shouting, "No kings." And they were all the ones, generally speaking, acting like tyrannical Karens about this whole 2020 thing. Even though there were those of us who were saying, why do you trust the government? You know they don't think twice about killing you off to achieve their ends. Do you not realize that also the medical profession is the number 3, I think personally, the number 1 leading cause of death in the country? And they profit off one another and the pharmaceuticals. Anyway, so take a moment to digest that entire list. Over a century ago, these 4 goals were allegedly set in motion. And here we are in 2025. And it's as if we're reading this as today's headlines. Control of banking? Of course. Check. The Federal Reserve and mega banks pretty much run the show, right? And they get rid of anybody who gets in their way. Corrupt puppets in government? I mean, how many politicians seem to serve lobbyists, global corporations, or foreign interests over their own people? And how many are on Epstein's list? Probably almost every one of them. Racial strife? Sadly, yes, it's still at a fever pitch. Some would argue intentionally aggravated by media and interest groups, because clearly it is. And not so much in the, if you want to call it flyover country or whatever, but it's still there, especially in the bigger cities. You may living in the country, you might not see it as much, but go downtown, you'll see it. So the demise of Christianity in public life, Christian values have been systematically pushed into the margins, and faith is often openly mocked or restricted. If you can't see the problem in the churches today and in our society, you're blind. I mean, we've all but abandoned the truth. And we basically, like the garden, decide apart from God for ourselves, like our own gods, what is good and evil. We don't care about what he thinks. In fact, if it's something we don't like, we just find ways or things out of scripture and wrap our wagons around it or whatever and ignore anything else in scripture that says otherwise and go about our day. It's really unbelievable. So Fagan presents these not just as observations, but as a result of a deliberate conspiracy. And he doesn't leave it at theory. He provides historical evidence of Jacob Schiff carrying out each point of the plan. So let's follow Fagan's narrative through each of these 4 fronts. First of all, the control of America's money, the Federal Reserve coup. Schiff's first objective was to take over the U.S. financial system when he arrived in New York. He was an ambitious young banker armed with Rothschild backing. He couldn't just snap his fingers and seize the U.S. Treasury. It would be a patient, multi-step process. Fagan details how Schiff embedded himself on Wall Street. He joined the banking firm Kuhn, Loeb and Company, eventually taking control of it, and then used it as a beachhead to collaborate with other powerful bankers. And initially, Wall Street titans like J.P. Morgan looked down on this little bewhiskered man from the German ghettos, as he called him. But Schiff had the one thing they craved: access to the Rothschild capital. By distributing slices of lucrative European financing, the Rothschilds' bones, Schiff won over the Morgans, Harrimans, Carnegies, and Rockefellers. In essence, he became the gatekeeper between the old European money dynasties and the burgeoning American industrial empires. And before long, Schiff had forged an alliance of banking houses and a tight control of the entire banking fraternity on Wall Street. Now, by 1908, Jacob Schiff decided it was time for the end game: seize America's money mechanism outright. The plan culminated in what we know as the creation of, shout it louder, that's right, Federal Reserve System, a central bank that would control U.S. currency and credit. Fagan pulls no punches describing how this went down. In the fall of 1910, Schiff and his lieutenants, power brokers like Paul Warburg, Senator Nelson Aldrich, Colonel Edward Mandell House, and members of the Rockefeller and Morgan interests met in secret at the famous Jekyll Island Club in Georgia. Quote, in the fall of that year, they assembled in secret conclave at the Jekyll Island Hunt Club. Among those present were J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Colonel House, Senator Nelson, Aldrich, Schiff, Paul Warburg, in short, all of the international bankers in America. All of them members of the hierarchy of the Illuminati's Great Conspiracy. And a week later, they emerged with what they called the Federal Reserve System. What a scam this is. So, out of that clandestine meeting came the draft of the Federal Reserve Act, legislation to create a central bank owned by private banks. Yeah, that's right. It's not government. It's private banks. Schiff's agent, Senator Aldrich, was tasked with pushing the bill in Congress. But they had one big hurdle. The White House, President William Howard Taft, opposed the Aldrich plan and would likely veto it. Probably why you never really hear about Taft. So the conspirators held off until they could plant their own man in the White House, an obedient stooge who would sign the federal act into law. And they found their man in good old Woodrow Wilson, whom they helped elect in 1912. And sure enough, once Wilson was inaugurated, the Federal Reserve Act, disguised as a measure to stabilize the economy, right? Think Patriot Act, was rushed through Congress during the Christmas recess of 1913, when most lawmakers were absent. Of course, nothing changes. We do the same immorally stupid thing today. So Wilson, true to his puppeteers, signed it on December 23rd, 1913, that day of infamy, as Fagan calls it. Because it is. And now Fagan's outrage at this is palpable. He reminds us that the U.S. Constitution explicitly vested the power to coin money in Congress alone, precisely to prevent private banking interests from taking over, just like this. And so the Federal Reserve Act betrayed that bedrock principle, handing over America's financial sovereignty to a cartel of bankers. And guess who owned and ran the Fed's regional banks? Those same Illuminati banking booger eaters, the Schiffs, Warburgs, Rockefellers, Morgans, under the new collective banner of the CFR. The vast majority of Americans think the Federal Reserve is a government agency. I was one of those idiots for the longest time. It's what I was taught, pretty much. I mean, they didn't specifically say it, but they clearly implied it when I went to the government school in high school. We had to take a class on government. They probably don't even do that anymore, is my guess. It's a bygone age now. Anyway, it is positively false. It outrages Fagan. And he says that it is owned by private member banks. Because it is. And its governors have always been allied with the CFR conspiracy. And it's hard to overstate how consequential this was. By controlling the issuance of money and credit, the Fed could create booms and busts. They could expand or contract the economy, and in debt the nation, and has it ever. What are we at? 37 trillion maybe now? I mean, consider since they would probably never have even dreamed those numbers back then. So they're probably successful beyond their wildest dreams. And consider since 1913, the US dollar has lost over 95% of its value via inflation. Effectively, a hidden tax engineered by those controlling the money supply spigots. The Federal Reserve also enabled the U.S. government to rack up astronomical debts, war debts, welfare state debts, and you name it. The more spending, the better to accomplish this. They're doing it even today. Anyway, that would have been impossible under sound money. In short, Schiff's mission number one accomplished beyond their wildest imaginations. The American people's wealth and economic fate were delivered into the hands of an oligarchy who could manipulate it all at will. And as one of Fagan's sources, Eustace Mullins, author of the Federal Reserve Conspiracy, laid out, it was treason, because it was. But they're such liars, and they control the media, so they'll never be held accountable for it. And most of them, I mean, obviously, the originators, yes, but they still do it today, and they still treat it in the same way today, and they should all be tried for treason as a result for not getting rid of it, in my eyes. Treason in finance. So Fagan also notes that the Fed was only part A of controlling America's wealth. Part B was the adoption of a federal income tax. That's right. The 16th Amendment, also in 1913, to allow direct confiscation of individual earnings. A central bank and a progressive income tax. Communism, anyone? Interestingly, two planks straight out of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, both implemented in that pivotal year of 1913. Coincidence? Not to Fagan. He sees the hidden hand pushing both through the same Wilson-era puppets. So, he points out that Schiff's crowd got their lackeys in Congress and President Wilson to ram through the 16th Amendment as well, thus giving the conspirators the means not just to print money at will, but to legally plunder a portion of every American's labor. What they couldn't grab via inflation, they would take via taxation of us. And it's so much more than that now. You probably pay 50 to 60% of your income to taxes and fees everywhere you go, and you just don't even know it. You pay for it in the price of gas at the pump. Some of us pay for it in groceries, like in Tennessee. You pay for it with your wheel tax, your property tax, your breathing tax. You have to use the bathroom tax. There's a tax and a fee for everything. I want to go fishing. Oh, you got to get a fishing license. Wait, I have to pay to get a license to do something I have the freedom to do? Anyway, it's very frustrating. I hate paying tax. I hate doing my taxes. We all do. To summarize this phase, by 1913, Illuminati agents effectively hijacked the American monetary system. Think of the power that provides. They could now finance anything they wanted. Wars, social engineering programs, corporate takeovers, by creating money out of nothing. Why are we even taxed then? Let's print all we want. Well, if you can print all you want, just pay off the debt. Print off the debt. Why are we even being taxed? And saddling the public with the cost. They could also starve or stimulate sectors at will. And importantly, they could bankroll the next stages of their agenda, including corrupting the political process and stirring social conflicts, with essentially unlimited funds extorted from the American people. So it's a sobering thought. From Fagan's perspective, the moment the Fed was established, America became a hostage to an international banking cabal. And remarkably, an American congressman of that era, Charles Lindbergh Sr., said the same. Quote, "When the president signed this act, the invisible government by the money power proven to exist by the money trust investigation was legalized." Unquote. It was treason, financial treason. So number 2, installing political puppets from Wilson to today. Well, let's change out our thing here and get a nice little image up here. I'll do the slideshow for a bit. How's that? So you don't get bored of looking at my face. Voila. So, controlling the money was only the first step. Schiff's second directive was to place willing stooges in key positions, like we were saying. I'm just going over the details of it. To hijack the political machinery from the inside. Fagan shows how Jacob Schiff became a kingmaker in American politics. We saw how he ensured Woodrow Wilson's election to achieve the Fed. But Schiff's influence didn't stop at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The tentacles extended into Congress, the cabinet, and even the Supreme Court. And over the years, many powerful American figures were knowingly or not doing the Illuminati's bidding thanks to behind-the-scenes grooming and backing. Fagan actually provides a sweeping statement after cataloging various betrayals up through the 1960s. Here he's quoted as saying this, quote, "Every unconstitutional and unlawful act committed by Woodrow Wilson, by Franklin Roosevelt, by Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy are now being committed by Johnson, is exactly in line with the Illuminati conspirators' century-old plot outlined by Weishaupt and Albert Pike. Every vicious decision issued by the traitorous Earl Warren and his Supreme Court, every bit of treason by our State Department under Rusk and earlier under Dulles and Marshall, also all the treason committed by McNamara and his predecessors, and the amazing treason by various members of Congress, especially the 66 senators who signed the Consular Treaty, has been committed on orders from the Illuminati, better known today as the CFR." So this is a scathing indictment of virtually the entire U.S. establishment across multiple administrations, right? Fagan asserts that from Wilson, 1910s, through Johnson, the 60s, no matter which party in power, the same agenda was advanced. Do you think it is any better today? Or do you think it's 1,000 times worse? I think the answer is obvious. No matter what, the same agenda, advancement to the Novus Ordo Seclorum, new order for the ages, one world government, is being pushed. Think about it. Wilson, Democrat, ushered in the Fed and failed League of Nations. FDR, Democrat, grew federal power massively and helped midwife the UN. Truman, Democrat, recognized communist China and fired General MacArthur under UN pressure. Eisenhower, Republican, built the military-industrial complex and spoke of a great crusade for globalism. Kennedy, Democrat, entangled us in the UN and was working on disarming agreements. Johnson, Democrat, signed UN treaties and escalated Vietnam under dubious pretexts. Reagan, I know everybody thinks he's awesome. He did their bidding too. You can't touch a pharmaceutical company because of him. Now, according to Fagan, different faces, same puppet masters. He singles out Supreme Court Chief, Fagan does, Justice Earl Warren as well. Warren's court, in Fagan's eyes, delivered decisions that perfectly served the conspiracy. Two decisions in particular enraged Fagan and many conservatives of the time, banning school-sponsored prayer and forcing school desegregation. Now, those might sound like unrelated issues, one about religion, the other about race, but if you recall, Schiff's point 3 and 4 promote racial strife and destroy Christianity. Fagan saw Warren's 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision mandating desegregation of schools as less about justice and more about provoking social upheaval. And indeed, the aftermath saw fierce resistance, federal troops in the South, riots, a period of great tension that a clever manipulator could exploit. And the 1962 to 63 rulings removing prayer, Bible reading from public schools, he saw as a direct attack on America's Christian bedrock. Fagan practically spits fire on this point. He's quoted as saying, "Can you see why the vile Earl Warren and his equally vile company, Supreme Court justices, issued that infamous desegregation decision in 1954? It was to aid and abet the plot of the Illuminati conspirators to create tension and strife between the Negroes and whites. Can you see why the same Earl Warren issued his decision prohibiting Christian prayer and Christmas carols in our schools? It was done to destroy Christianity. Now, I know it didn't destroy Christianity, but the point is it destroys the influence of it in your society and creates moral ambiguity over time. Like the whole boiling pot that you slowly increase the heat with a frog in it, and the frog doesn't notice and gets boiled to death. So linking those two might seem controversial, but Fagan suggesting a coordinated strategy used the courts to fuel the two biggest wedges in American society, race and religion. The conspirators, he argues, wanted to see blacks and whites at each other's throats and wanted to secularize the youth, because a fractured, demoralized society, again, is easier to reshape. And the 1960s did see an explosion of both those things, did they not? Racial conflict and secularism. So one can follow his logic even if you don't fully agree with the interpretation of motives. It was a success. Beyond the 60s, what about today? We might reflect how many of our modern leaders have pushed towards globalism, war, or social fragmentation. We're still carrying out the CFR Illuminati agenda, regardless of campaign promises or party lines, right? The pattern still exists. For instance, nearly every president in recent memory has entangled the U.S. in endless wars. Haven't they? Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. And we've expanded international trade deals or organizations, the WTO, NAFTA, Paris Climate Accord, and spoken favorably of the New World Order or global rules-based system. And many of them staff their administrations with CFR members and trilateral commission folks, the very milieu Fagan warned about. The puppet show continues today. Just with new marionettes, right? So even when a political figure comes along who appears to buck the globalist agenda, they face vicious opposition from every side and establishment. I mean, consider how the entire bureaucracy, media, and even elements of their own party can turn on such a person, hamstring any real deviation from the script, right? It does make a person wonder, is there an invisible hand ensuring that no matter who we vote for, the permanent agenda, global integration, debt, and cultural engineering stays on track? Even in my opinion, in this day and age, staging their Hegelian dialect and offering a hero to still further the agenda. And I think you all know who I'm talking about. So Fagan also touches on how Schiff solved the problem of controlling political parties. In the early 1900s, Republicans dominated the presidency. Schiff chose to pour resources into the Democratic Party, the hungrier party at the time, more easily bought because they were out of power and underfunded. By leveraging immigrant voter blocs, even fomenting immigration waves like they do today, same playbook, Fagan notes such as Jewish refugees from the Rothschild-fomented pogroms in Russia, who then settled in big cities and reliably voted Democrat. Schiff flipped the script. Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, won in 1912. Since then, control has seesawed, but importantly, both major parties gradually came under sway. As Fagan implied, it ultimately didn't matter if a Nelson Aldrich, Republican senator, or a Henry Morgenthau, Democrat advisor, was the frontman. If they were tied into the international banking clique or the CFR, they were Illuminati agents first, Americans second. And by 1967, Fagan viewed 66 U.S. senators who voted for a certain UN-related treaty as outright traitors on Illuminati orders. The cynic might say, is it any better now when many legislators vote on bills crafted by lobbyists and backroom bills they often don't even read? You know they don't read them. We know this. They don't give a rip, and they're never brought to task on it by any member of the media, really. Unless somebody has stepped out of line and they need to be embarrassed back into shape. So, Fagan's message, America's government had been infiltrated at every level. And this was back then, folks. Again, this is back in the 60s. You know it's so much worse now. Schiff's network helped shape policy through presidents like Wilson and FDR, through influential agents like Colonel Edward Mandell House, Wilson's handler, and Harry Hopkins, FDR's close advisor, through secretaries of state like John Foster Dulles, and on and on and on. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the Council on Foreign Relations sat quietly grooming generations of diplomats, bureaucrats, and media figures to accept and promote globalism as gospel. And a quick check on recent times confirms that CFR influence is alive and well, right? Practically every U.S. administration has had key cabinet members or advisors from the CFR. Even those who aren't even formal members circulate in the same think tank and corporate circles. So one could argue, as many do, including myself, that there is a continuity of agenda that transcends the left-right puppet theater. It's the establishment agenda, and it has remained on course, even with all their games. Global economic integration, erosion of national sovereignty through treaties, UN agreements, endless policing of the world with American blood and treasure, and the steady chipping away at traditional values and middle-class cohesion at home. And then the third, fostering racial strife, divide and rule, right? Looks like we're going to go long again. So sorry. Jacob Schiff's third assignment was to divide the American people against each other, particularly along racial lines. I know we mentioned that earlier. My point is I'm giving you the details now on how he did this and how it's still going on today. The program is still going on today. So, in the early 20th century, part of Schiff's plan involved manipulating immigration and minority politics. We saw how Schiff allegedly helped drive Jews out of Europe with Rothschild-funded programs, then settled many in America as a Democrat-aligned voting bloc, just like we do across the border of Mexico. But Fagan says the Illuminati knew that Jewish immigrants alone weren't going to riot in the streets or destabilize the nation. They were mostly fleeing hardship and wanted to assimilate. The real weapon would be the historical grievance within America, the plight of Black Americans. As Fagan bluntly puts it, the Negro population was a made-to-order, though as yet sleeping minority group that could be ignited to cause upheaval. So, and this is touchy territory, and hopefully I won't get in trouble with YouTube because I'm just quoting Fagan, and this is for entertainment only. YouTube. So this is touchy territory, but let's unpack his viewpoint. He essentially is claiming that the genuine injustices faced by Black Americans from slavery's legacy, segregation, were cynically exploited by elite conspirators who wanted to sow chaos. The Illuminati did not care one whit about improving the lives of Black Americans or any minority. They did not care. What they cared about was using racial conflict to destabilize society and centralize power. Do you understand that? I know they tell you they care, but that's just to get your trust. All you have to do is look at their fruit. So Fagan gives a concrete example, the NAACP. It might surprise some to learn that the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, founded in 1909, was largely founded and funded by white liberals and socialists, some of whom were connected to elite circles like Schiff and his circle. In fact, Jacob Schiff himself donated to the NAACP in its early years, and other prominent bankers and elites were involved in funding it as well. Fagan and other critics have suggested that organizations like the NAACP were used to agitate racial issues when needed, acting as a pressure valve that the conspirators could turn on or off at will. Similarly, Fagan identifies the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, established in 1913, also with Schiff's backing, as an Illuminati Gestapo to attack and smear anyone who got too close to the truth, branding patriots as anti-Semites to silence them. You can't trust any of these organizations or government agencies. And then he even calls these groups fronts or Illuminati tools, and in one fiery passage, Fagan demands a congressional investigation of, quote, the CFR and all their fronts, such as the ADL, the NAACP, the SNIC, the SNCC, and such Illuminati tools as Martin Luther King. Yes, I'm sorry, Fagan called him Martin Lucifer King. Yes, he referred to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with a blistering pun instead of Lucifer. And that shows Fagan's belief that even the civil rights leadership in the 60s was manipulated by or serving the conspiracy. Now, many listeners may find that assertion extreme. Martin Luther King Jr., whatever his personal flaws, is widely revered as a champion of justice. Why would Fagan label him an Illuminati tool? Well, you have to understand Fagan's context. In 1967, race riots were convulsing American cities, Harlem, Watts, Detroit, etc. Black power movements were emerging, and white backlash was also brewing. The ideal of integration championed by MLK had, in the short term, led to intense social friction. Fagan likely saw this turmoil as precisely what the conspirators wanted: America tearing itself apart from within. He may have believed that King, wittingly or unwittingly, was being used to provoke confrontation through marches, civil disobedience, etc., which did indeed spark often violent responses. It's known that some of the King's advisors, like Bayard Rustin, had socialist leanings, and groups like the Communist Party USA or other far-left elements tried to influence the civil rights movement. Fagan might have lumped all that together as Illuminati orchestration. And it may have been. Either way, it served their purpose, whether it was intended or not. Furthermore, as a staunch anti-communist, Fagan knew that the Soviet Union exploited racial tensions in the U.S. as propaganda and possibly through active measures. Declassified records later showed the KGB did try to infiltrate some black radical groups in the 60s. Since Fagan saw communism itself as a creation of the Illuminati, more on that in a second, any civil unrest that had a red tinge would be seen as Illuminati fomented. And for good reason. Now, whether or not one agrees fully, Fagan's broader point stands: divide and rule is a classic strategy. The Pilgrims Grey audience can surely think of how identity politics today, racial, ethnic, gender, etc., often seems deliberately magnified by the media and elites to keep society constantly bickering and distracted. It's all water cooler BS talk. And as one modern saying goes, it's easier to rule slaves when you pit them against each other. And while we fight each other, the one-world architects quietly continue building their tower. Even after the 60s, the racial agitation didn't vanish. It evolved. In recent years, we've seen waves of protest, some peaceful, and some descending into rioting and looting, with tragic incidents as catalyst, right? Ferguson, Charlottesville, the 2020 unrest following George Floyd's death. Each time it feels like certain forces pour gasoline on the fire. Money then often flows in from somewhere, right, to support the protest, and often sometimes to bail out the rioters. And who benefits from Americans viewing each other with suspicion or hostility along racial lines? Certainly not the average black or white citizen, who mostly want to live in peace, but it does benefit those pushing for top-down control, because a nation divided cannot stand against tyranny. It will instead beg a central authority to come restore order. So Fagan was adamant that Americans of all races were being played by these elites. He urged, in effect, for people to see beyond the manufactured hatreds. He called those 66 senators who passed a pro-UN treaty 20th century Benedict Arnolds, traitors selling us out, and hinted that we, the people, should hold all such traitors accountable rather than fighting ourselves. But we did not. We didn't do anything. Most people weren't paying attention, or they trusted their politicians. Bad idea. In his lecture, he actually calls for massive citizen action to impeach and punish those who aid the enemy, to investigate the subversive organizations, and to get the U.S. out of the UN and the UN out of the U.S. But it did not work, because we Americans watch our TVs and listen to figures we should not trust. It's what we do, and we do it really well. So, the fourth prong of Schiff's mandate, and I think that's our last one. Let me check my notes here, but yes. And then we move on to world wars. So, subverting religion, the war on Christianity. This fourth prong of Schiff's mandate we mentioned earlier is probably the most overlooked in mainstream accounts. And yet Fagan saw it as absolutely critical, right? Destroy American religion with Christianity as the prime target. Why Christianity? Because the conspirators understood that the faith and the moral unity provided by Christianity and belief in God-given rights was a massive bulwark against their plans. A truly God-fearing people are not easily enslaved. They recognize no earthly authority higher than the Almighty. At least that's the way it should be. But it clearly is not any longer, is it? So, to make Americans bow to a one-world dictator, their allegiance to God and moral law had to be weakened, and boy, is it. Can't tell you how many Christians will quote Romans chapter 13 no matter how immoral the government gets. Well, we got to obey them. They're the government. God tells us to obey. Really? I know three Hebrew boys captured that didn't obey governing authorities. I have way more respect for them than virtually any church leader today. So Fagan reveals that Jacob Schiff outsourced this particular task to his ally, John D. Rockefeller. Yes, that oil baron. And the Rockefellers, like the Rothschilds, are a banking family intimately tied to the globalist web. According to Fagan, Rockefeller found a willing Judas in a so-called minister, Reverend Harry F. Ward. In 1907, Rockefeller funded Reverend Ward to create the Methodist Foundation for Social Service, which essentially a front to train fake or compromised ministers. And what did Ward teach these aspiring clergymen? Not the pure gospel of Christ, but a social gospel tinged with doubt and Marxist ideology. Fagan describes Ward's method, quote, Reverend Ward taught them how to subtly and craftily preach to their congregations that the entire story of Christ was a myth, to cast doubts on the divinity of Christ, on the Virgin Mary, and in short, to cast doubts on Christianity as a whole. It was not to be a direct attack, but done by crafty insinuation, particularly aimed at the youth in the Sunday schools, unquote. So this is really crappy if true, and it is true. So rather than attack the church from outside, they would infiltrate from within, wolves in sheep's clothing, gradually watering down doctrine, sowing skepticism, and promoting a left-wing political agenda under the banner of Christian social justice. And indeed, Reverend Harry F. Ward turned out to be a notorious communist. He was identified as a party member and was the first chairman of the ACLU, which Fagan calls a notorious pro-communist organization, because it is. And under Ward's influence, the Methodist Foundation for Social Service eventually morphed in 1908 into the Federal Council of Churches, which later, in the 40s, became the National Council of Churches, which everybody today thinks is so great, and it is not. So now the NCC and similar I can never pronounce this word, ecumenical bodies were supposed to promote Christian unity, But Fagan contended that they were Trojan horses that spread modernist theology and leftist politics, thereby undermining true faith. And he warns Christians, if your church is part of the National Council of Churches, your donations may be funding the Illuminati's plot to destroy Christianity. He urges believers to find out immediately if your church is a member, and if so, to withdraw from it at once. So consider the fruits. By the mid-20th century, many mainline Protestant denominations in the NCC indeed had embraced very liberal theology, questioning biblical miracles, denying Christ's resurrection or divinity. They also leaned into socialist ideals, sometimes excusing communism. And it's no wonder Fagan viewed them as thoroughly compromised. He even noted that many ministers, priests, and nuns were participating in left-wing political marches, like civil rights demonstrations, evidence to him that subversive doctrine had permeated even Catholic and other denominations to some extent. Notably, he exempted the Mormon Church as the only one clean of that Judas infiltration, though one could easily debate that, given later trends. Believe me, I'm not saying the Mormon Church is great. This is Fagan. And we all know why the Mormon, well, maybe we don't know, but the Mormon Church is not great either. It has a whole lot in common with the same way that Islam was founded. Sorry. Once again, after speaking for over an hour straight, my voice starts to give out. So now, zoom out to the present. What has become of American religion? Anybody? Is it in good or bad shape? I think we've seen a dramatic decline in traditional Christianity in public life. That's pretty obvious. We have people who don't even know if they're male or female anymore, or both, or some bizarre combination thereof. Prayer was taken out of schools. Fagan saw that coming. The Ten Commandments and nativity scenes are banished from many public spaces. Churches that hold to biblical teachings on marriage or morality face lawsuits, shaming, and even loss of tax status in some cases. And meanwhile, some large denominations have essentially adopted secular progressive platforms, blessing things that would have been unthinkable to Christians just a generation or two ago, and treating cultural Marxism as a new gospel. Even the concept of absolute truth, central to Christianity, has been largely replaced in society by relativism. Your truth, my truth, their truth, which is the curse of the garden, by the way. Subjective. It's one of the curses anyway. And it's a hallmark of Marxist and humanist philosophy. And we're not supposed to have a new gospel, right? So it's to the point that you could argue the one world church Fagan warned of is taking shape. An ecumenical interfaith blob that sets aside doctrine, especially inconvenient Christian doctrines, of course, in favor of a universalist, feel-good, politically correct pseudo-religion. It's like we've become the United Federation of Planets. There even open talk by globalists about uniting religions for the cause of climate change or world peace. The end game, Fagan mentioned, a one-world church in which Christianity would be prohibited, is on the horizon. Obviously, we're not there yet, but we've seen how Christian values are steadily pressured out of the public square, and there's growing hostility, labeling devout Christians as intolerant or extremist and unloving. They're really not going to like the millennial reign of Christ then, when he reigns with an iron rod. Probably one of the reasons it's so easy for Lucifer, like Ed Mabry said, to gather the easily deceived people who are born into the millennial kingdom still with a sinful nature and rally them against us in Jesus. Because we're unloving and we don't approve of their sin, just like today. So Fagan recounted Pike's prediction that after a great social cataclysm, people disillusioned with Christianity will receive the true light of Lucifer. How chillingly close we are to that if current trends continue, right? The stage is being set so that if crises erupt, be it world war, economic collapse, pandemics, or everything combined, a desperate populace, largely unmoored from their faith, might accept anything that promises relief. Even a Luciferian new doctrine dressed up as enlightened global spirituality. Or a messianic-like figure saving us from all these problems. Maybe even set up by visitors. You may say they're from another world. So Fagan implored Christians to wake up. He reminded listeners of Lenin's boast. Right? Give me just one generation of youth, and I'll transform the whole world. The conspirators knew the youth are the key, thus the targeted infiltration of education and churches to capture young minds. If we look at today's youth, many have grown up with little to no biblical knowledge or faith foundation, or any real education at all. Many of them can't even read. They're almost illiterate. And they're taught to view religion as archaic or bigoted. And this makes them prime recruits for the new secular order, to work for them as slaves and do whatever they're told, because they can't critically think. So before moving on, consider how prescient Fagan was on this front. All the way back then, he named names. The Rockefellers backing false prophets, the ACLU spawned by those false prophets. Today, the ACLU often fights to scrub Christianity from public life. The Federal National Council of Churches being communist influenced, many NCC stances did align with leftist policies. All these pieces have continued on the trajectory he outlined. The takeover of religion is nearly complete in some sectors, if not most by now. And where subversion failed, scandals, some possibly engineered or at least magnified, have damaged the credibility of churches everywhere. Sexual abuse crisis, televangelist frauds, further driving people away from faith. And Fagan would likely say exactly as planned. Demoralize, discredit, and replace. It's a good plan, right? I mean, if your goal is to have a new order for the ages. So up to this point, now we've covered how the Illuminati infiltrated institutions, but one of their most devastating tools is war itself. Fagan lays out a staggering claim: the major global wars and even some revolutions of the past 2 centuries were deliberately orchestrated to advance the one world agenda. War not only profits the international bankers who fund all sides, but also it can radically alter the political map in favor of centralization of power. So Fagan points to a sinister blueprint drawn up in the 19th century by Illuminati visionaries like Albert Pike. Yes, that one, the infamous Confederate general and high-ranking Freemason. And according to Fagan, Albert Pike wrote a letter in 1871 outlining plans for 3 world wars needed to achieve Illuminati domination. Whether or not one takes the authenticity of that letter at face value, Fagan treats it as prophetic, and disturbingly, history aligns with it. I don't think it's a fake, but I can't prove it. I can just look at what he said and see it coming to fruition. So World War I, 1914 to 18, the goal: destroy the Tsarist regime in Russia and create a stronghold for atheistic communism. Also ignite wider instability to lay groundwork for a global organization. The result? The war indeed did topple the Russian Tsar in 1917, and the Bolsheviks took over, establishing the first communist state. Fagan notes that the Rothschilds had vowed revenge on the Tsar for blocking his plans in 1815, and World War I fulfilled that vow. The war was fomented by stirring an animosity between the British and German empires, 2 major powers, and by secret machinations, the network of alliances and the sparks in the Balkans. After World War I, communism was built up as planned, and an attempt was made to form a one-world government under the League of Nations, which ultimately failed due to nationalist resistance, particularly from the U.S. Senate. So, Then comes World War II from 1939 to 1945. The goal: pit fascism against political Zionism, destroy Nazi Germany, strengthen the communist bloc, and facilitate the establishment of Israel in Palestine. Now, the result: check, check, and check, right? Fagan details that Hitler was aided in rising to power by international bankers, right? The Krupps, Warburgs, Rothschilds, and the Illuminati had no qualms sacrificing millions of Jews in the Holocaust. Indeed, Fagan alleges that the slaughter of the supposed 600,000 Jews by Hitler didn't bother the Jewish international bankers at all, because it served their broader aim. That number is likely a transcription error of Fagan misspeaking. Historically, 6 million is the figure. Either way, his point is the top financiers were amoral and didn't care about the common folk of their own ethnicity or really any other. And World War II duly obliterated the Nazi regime and other nationalist regimes like Imperial Japan and Fascist Italy. And it immensely boosted Soviet communism. Which was extending its reach over Eastern Europe and into China. It also galvanized world sympathy to create the State of Israel in 1948, fulfilling the Zionist aspiration, which now provides a perennial flashpoint in global affairs for them. And of course, out of the ashes of World War II came the successful creation of a new global body, right? The failed League of Nations, which is now the United Nations. In 1945, the housing for world government and that the League had failed to be. And it's still here to this day. So, then we have the upcoming World War III Albert Pike wrote about. The goal of this one is to ignite a war between political Zionism and the Islamic world that will be so devastating that it brings about universal exhaustion, physical, mental, spiritual, and economic. The plan is for Israel and the Arab Muslim nations to destroy each other while dragging in the rest of the world divided along those lines, leading to global chaos. And in the aftermath, the Illuminati expect to be able to impose a totalitarian one-world government. And in Pike's chilling vision, to unveil the pure doctrine of Lucifer as the new world religion after Christianity and atheism have been mutually exterminated. By whatever rises out of this, which we know it will involve some sort of miraculous, miracle-working false messiah and a false prophet. So Fagan delivered this outline in 1967. At that time, Israel had just won the Six-Day War, and tensions with the Arab world were sky high. And he asked pointedly, quote, "Now, can any thinking person doubt that the intrigue now going on in the Near, Middle, and Far East is designed to accomplish that satanic objective," unquote. So, fast forward to today and consider how much conflict and buildup we see around the Zionist versus Islamic world narrative. The War on Terror, right, 2001, essentially pitted Western powers allied with Israel against various Muslim forces, Al-Qaeda, which was ISIS at the time, stirring animosity to a fevered pitch. The Middle East remains a tinderbox, with the Iran versus Israel shadow conflict, Sunni versus Shia proxy wars, and great powers hovering, right? US, NATO versus Russia, China alignments. Any spark could escalate. And meanwhile, the Far East intrigue, as Fagan mentioned, likely refers to Far East Asia, perhaps alluding to using Asia, like China, in some conflict scenario as well. So it's sobering how much of Pike's alleged World War III script resonates with today's events and the rise of radical Islam and radical Zionism. So the intractable Israeli-Palestinian issue, terrorism, and anti-terror wars, these have indeed set the stage for a potential big clash. If such a war erupted, like a regional war that draws in Russia, China, etc., the devastation could be enormous, and nations would indeed be exhausted. We're already exhausted and desperate for peace at any cost. And people worldwide might accept a global authority to prevent another war, exactly as they did after World War II in the UN. Only this time, as Pike predicted, it will be on steroids and led by a messianic-like figure. So importantly, Fagan notes that communism was nurtured through these wars as a tool. He argues that communism was never a grassroots people movement. Rather, it was created by the money powers to advance the conspiracy. For example, Jacob Schiff funded not only the Fed, but also Trotsky and Lenin. There is historical evidence Schiff bankrolled revolutionaries. And Fagan goes deeper, describing how Schiff sent $20 million in gold to Lenin and Trotsky to finance the Bolshevik Revolution. He recounts how Trotsky, en route to Russia with revolutionaries, was briefly detained by Canadian authorities during World War I, but Schiff pulled strings through an infuriated U.S. President Wilson to get him released so that the plan could proceed. The result, Russia fell to communism, which the Illuminati then used as a boogeyman and battering ram. Boogeyman because it scared nations into yielding freedoms, right? McCarthy era of military buildups. And battering ram because it was used to break down old orders, right? Monarchies and churches, and enslave half the world under collectivism, conveniently concentrating power in a few hands. So, Fagan lists how, after Lenin's victory, Schiff ordered the Bolsheviks to change their name to the Communist Party and adopt Marx's manifesto as their constitution, signaling that the movement was under his control. Throughout the Cold War, Fagan contends the CFR and Illuminati in the U.S. continued to support communism behind the scenes while publicly decrying it. For instance, he points out that the international bankers financed both sides of conflicts. They armed the USSR in the West. They funded Nazi Germany and the Allies. War is extremely profitable and also helps advance global governance. We saw that after World War II, right? People accepted the UN. After a theoretical World War III, might they not accept some sort of full-on world government? I mean, the Book of Revelation seems to think so. And Fagan describes how after World War II, the conspirators ensured a few things, right? Like, number one, the communist bloc was strengthened, just like they predicted. Roosevelt and Churchill handing Eastern Europe to Stalin at Yalta, right? And then number two, the UN was framed as humanity's last best hope for peace, right? With its charter crafted by CFR members like Alger Hiss, later exposed as a Soviet spy. And they cleverly had it birthed in the U.S. San Francisco Conference and located in New York to make Americans emotionally invested and less likely to oppose it. And indeed, despite early warnings, Americans embraced the UN. Good job, guys. Way to listen to the PSYOP propaganda, just like we do today. And then third, post-war, the CFR extended its grip, setting up a myriad of front organizations like the World Affairs Council, Foreign Policy Association, blah, 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 and capturing the media, as we covered, to push the narrative that we need world government to prevent war. Oh, yes. Of course. So Fagan predicted the pattern, right? War, solution, more power to globalists, rinse and repeat. He saw the Vietnam War, still raging in '67, as another move. It was technically a UN police action, just like Korea, meant to keep the world in conflict and justify strengthening international institutions. He actually notes that during the Korean War, the UN's undersecretary, a Soviet, by the way, was giving orders to the communist side, and UN directives prevented General MacArthur from winning, essentially forcing a stalemate. Folks, we could have kicked their butt instantly if we wanted to. But that wasn't the goal. So history shows Truman indeed fired MacArthur when he wanted to push harder against the North Koreans in China. And Fagan asserts that was at UN behest, which it was. And the result was a protracted war with no victory. But it habituated America to perpetual war footing and further empower the UN. We just get used to things, right? In Vietnam, Similarly, absurd rules of engagement and the dragging on of the conflict fit their aims. Wear down Americans' will, foster disillusionment and social division at home, all right? The 60s anti-war upheaval. And again, no decisive victory, just a costly quagmire. All this disunity and fatigue could make citizens eventually say, we need a new system. This isn't working. A new system like, I don't know, global governance perhaps? So looking around now, even after the Cold War ended, did war stop? Of course not. So we had the Gulf War, the Balkans, then the 20-year War on Terror, and each has brought new crisis and justification for international cooperation or control. We even lost our Bill of Rights with the Patriot Act, pretty much. The War on Terror in particular led to things, again, like the Patriot Act, mass surveillance going on today, even internationally via Five Eyes, and erosion of liberties, all steps forward the kind of techno-tyranny a one-world government would impose universally. It also gave the UN more roles in nation-building in Afghanistan, for example, and kept the military-industrial machine humming, making a fortune. And now we hear rumblings about great power conflict again, right? The US and NATO versus Russia and Ukraine versus China or Taiwan, perhaps. It's as if the script is just ongoing, right? The curtain's up and the play is still just going on. You know, keep nations fearful and armed. And if a world war doesn't come spontaneously, then just engineer one. There's even speculations that economic warfare or a cyber pandemic could be the next World War type crisis. Any massive crisis could justify global solutions, right? So Fagan emphasizes none of these tragedies had to happen. They were orchestrated to reshape the world. For instance, he notes the Illuminati actually wanted World War I to be so awful that all nations would embrace a world government. World War I was horrific, but not quite horrific enough to overcome nationalism. The US and others rejected the League. So, as he puts it, the conspirators realized they'd need an even more horrible Second World War to get their world government, which is exactly what happened with the UN. And yet, even the UN was not given full government or full sovereign power. No world army yet, though it's been proposed. So guess what? They will likely push for an even more terrible world war, like World War III, to finally force humanity into a one-world dictatorship. Even if it's a war we're not expecting, like visitors from another world, like might have been hinted at by Reagan. And by then, nations will be so battered that hardly anyone will resist the cry. No more war. We'll accept a one-world army and one-world rule to fight visitors from other planets. If only we get peace and safety. Right? And what does 1 Thessalonians 5:3 say? As Scripture warns, while people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly. So in sum, Fagan's research teaches us that wars are not always what they seem. Yes, conflicts have proximate causes and genuine grievances, but overreaching them, in Fagan's view, are puppet masters steering events to their advantage. It's a sobering reminder to always ask, who benefits? After every war, the rich and powerful seem to get richer and more powerful, while folks like us bleed and the world edges closer to unified control. And so finally, front groups and controlled media hiding in plain sight. We've touched on some of the Illuminati front organizations like the ADL and NAACP, National Council of Churches, and they were used to manipulate society. Fagan stresses that many institutions that appear benign or even noble are actual Trojan horses for the conspiracy. And these front groups penetrate every sector. Political parties, labor unions, charitable foundations, civil rights groups, educational associations, you name it. They provide cover and respectability for the conspirators' agents to operate behind it. And in this lecture, I'm not going to go into it because we're going long, and I'll mention them by name. but I won't go into the specific details of it. But again, we have the Anti-Defamation League, we have the NAACP and SNCC, right? The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We have tax-exempt foundations like the Carnegie and Rockefeller and Ford, right? The Clinton Foundation. We have the CFR and their affiliates, right? Like the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome, right? Now, some of those aren't mentioned by Fagan, but they emerged after his time, but they're all tied in. And they are very much the lineal descendants of what he described Illuminati front groups bringing together the power players to coordinate policy outside democratic oversight, if there even is democratic oversight anymore. I'm convinced that it's all scripted. So on top of this is what Fagan called their special subsidiaries, right? The myriad committees and councils in every state and city to influence local affairs. And today, look at how many think tanks or NGOs churn out, right? Policy that magically gets adopted. And often CFR or its members, if you look hard enough, are lurking in there. Even global crises like pandemics see organizations like the Gates Foundation, right? Another modern foundation front, and the World Economic Forum coming to the forefront. And it's a vast interconnected network. And now perhaps their greatest weapon in plain sight is the mass media, right? Fagan devotes a lot of attention to how the conspirators conquered the American media in Hollywood. He says, quote, "The CFR's first and foremost job was to get complete control of our mass communication media." He details how Rockefeller was tasked with taking over the press. They funded Henry Lucci to create national magazines like Time, Life, Fortune, and they backed newspaper chains like the Cowles family's Look magazine and others. CFR founding members Eugene Meyer bought the Washington Post and Newsweek, and they nurtured a new breed of columnists and commentators like Lippman, Pearson, and Alsop brothers, who would parrot the globalist line. Over time, nearly all major newspapers and TV networks came under their influence. And for the entertainment side, they had Kuhn Loeb, Goldman Sachs, and other banker families infiltrate or finance Hollywood studios, radio, and later TV networks. Fagan says, believe you and me, they succeeded. And by the 60s, except for some small independent outlets, the media was thoroughly dominated by CFR-friendly owners and editors. He even attributes the rise in smut, sex, pornography, and mixed marriage films to a deliberate plan to demoralize the country, interestingly pointing out cultural subversion decades before the actual cultural war was a term. And it's well known that the big media of the mid-20th century was controlled by a handful of moguls. Now today, with conglomeration, literally 5 or 6 corporations own 90% of the media in the US. I don't know if you know that. And many of those corporations have CFR members on their boards. And big tech, Google, Facebook, Twitter, well, they became the new press pretty much. And they too are aligned with the global establishment, which is probably why I have so many dings on YouTube. So just look at how they censor content like mine that challenges the UN or WHO or other global narratives while boosting acceptable discourse. If you don't believe that, do a Google search on a narrative you know they wouldn't like. Do one on flat Earth, and you'll see, like, all the pages you come across initially are all going to be mocking it, or they'll give you controlled opposition things. So just as one example, but you could look up any other one. In Fagan's framework, the Illuminati have simply added new tools, social media, internet, to their arsenal, but kept the goal: manage the news, mold public belief. So Fagan gives a striking example of media slant. He says the CFR Groom columnists preached that Americanism is isolationism, isolationism is warmongering, and anti-communism is anti-Semitism and racism. So in other words, they twisted words to shame anyone who opposed the globalist or leftist line. And that is just like today, right? Same tactics being used. If you're a nationalist or populist, they call you an isolationist or a xenophobe. If you criticize the military intervention, somehow you hate freedom. Your warmongering accusations are flipped. If you are strongly anti-communist or point out, say, cultural Marxism, they might insinuate you're a bigot in disguise. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So the power of media control is that it brainwashes the masses without them even realizing it. We don't even watch TV anymore. We have a few Netflix shows we might watch. Like we recently watched Fubar, and it was fairly funny, a little crude, but funny. Fagan says that by the 60s, Americans were largely a nation of quarreling, wrangling, hating factions, thanks to this managed propaganda, primed to be divided and conquered, but also a nation distracted from the real threat, the one-world plot. People worry about what the TV feeds them, not noticing the chains being forged. And he encourages his audience to seek out alternative information, like this show. Not specifically, but I'm alternative information, believe me. He even plugged specific bulletins like Cinema Educational Guild pamphlets that expose the media takeover. And today we have the internet, where independent researchers like myself and others can bypass the mainstream. But we also see big tech censorship trying to clamp down on us by throttling our outreach or having to pay ridiculous sums to advertise our outreach. And so the struggle continues on the digital frontier. And I've experienced this firsthand myself. Say the wrong thing, and you go to re-education camp in YouTube. So front groups and media. It's a 1-2 punch. Right? The fronts create events, movements, and narratives. The media amplifies and legitimizes them, steering public opinion exactly where the conspirators want. For example, climate change. Scientific concerns turn global crusade has front groups, NGOs, UN panels, and wall-to-wall media support. It conveniently calls for global solutions that increase centralized control. Fagan didn't see this issue, but he would instantly recognize the pattern. And so will you. It's a manufactured crisis and a phony grassroots movement like Greta Thunberg. How dare you? Being used to justify power grabs. And we should highlight not everyone in these groups or media outlets is in on it, right? There are circles within circles like we went over in one of our other shows. Many are useful innocents or true believers of the surface cause. The genius of Illuminati fronts is that they attract idealists who do the legwork, not knowing the higher agenda. As Lenin reputedly says, the best revolutionary is a youth devoid of morals. Today's equivalent might be a naive college grad at an NGO who thinks they're saving the world, but are really advancing the elite's control schemes. And it's really sad, because they use good intentions harnessed for evil ends, just like they did in 2020. So Fagan believed an informed citizenry could break the spell, and he advocates writing and calling representatives to demand action, though I don't know what good that would do today. Supporting Congressman James B. Utt's bill in the 60s to get the U.S. out of the UN. Sadly, it didn't succeed, though the John Birch Society and others carried that banner for decades. He knew it was an uphill battle because the average American, bombarded by controlled media and busy with daily life, could not see the puppet strings, and we still don't today. And that's why he made his recording that we're going over today, to jolt people awake. And indeed, his closing words are a passionate plea for listeners to spread this information widely so enough people wake up to destroy the monster before it enslaves us all. So spread it. Share this everywhere. It's a good introductory lesson on why you should not trust your government or the media they control. And so now that we've covered all of his main points from 67, we're just going to look at 2025 real quick, looking back. And it is jaw-dropping how much of what he warned about and how it's unfolded, or even intensified. So the United Nations empowerment, right? The UN has grown way beyond a forum. It has now sprawling bureaucracies, the WHO, UNESCO, IMF, the World Bank, and they all deeply influence nations' policies. And through initiatives like Agenda 21 and 30, it effectively guides local development, often under the radar of voters, because most of us aren't paying attention. And Fagan's specific warning that the UN aim for a one world government, one world army, and one world court, and one world education and church is practically the UN's own advertising now. They openly do it, and they openly talk of global governance, which should outrage you, but it doesn't. And a UN Parliamentary Assembly, an International Criminal Court established in 2002, UN peacekeeping forces intervening in conflicts, and education for global citizenship programs, even disarmament. Fagan noted a UN law signed by Kennedy to disarm Americans. Today, UN small arms treaties seek to regulate firearms globally. And while they haven't disarmed the U.S., thanks to our Second Amendment faithful, the intent is there. They will try one day. If a crisis allowed, they'd happily oblige, right? Fagan asked back then, in 67, quote, "Do you realize how that fits with UN Charter Article 47, which says the UN Military Staff Committee shall direct all armies placed at its disposal," unquote. And now some politicians, even American, do support more UN control over military matters, especially in coalition actions. It's unbelievable. And then we have endless wars and war on terror. Not long after the Cold War ended, giving hope for peace, we got the Gulf War, right? Then the catastrophic 9/11 attacks that launched the war on terror. And that global war lasted 2 decades, justifying unprecedented surveillance, torture programs, and permanent war state thinking. It also significantly eroded civil liberties with the Patriot Act, right? Label you a terrorist and you have no rights. Fagan would say that 9/11 served the Illuminati agenda greatly. It created an external enemy, right? Terror, to justify internal control and further international entanglements, like NATO operations out of area, the UN being used in Afghanistan. And while the US sacrificed lives and wealth, international banks and contractors got filthy rich. And no sooner did the war on terror wind down than great power tensions ramped right back up. Right? The script demands an ultimate conflict to birth the New World Order fully. And right now, we're seeking talk of a possible World War III scenario involving nuclear powers, right? Not unlike Fagan's predicted Third World War, which he said would likely start in the Middle East or via Zion versus Islam. Anyway, it would create a domino effect. Either way, they're looking for a World War III. And then, in regards to technology, elites, and digital control, one thing Fagan didn't explicitly foresee, though he knew media tech of his day, is the rise of big tech monopolies. Today, companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon have as much, if not more power than many states. They have data on you and everything you like and like to look at and read and comment on. They have pictures of you and your family. They have data on billions and can algorithmically shape behavior as a result. And lo and behold, they are fully on board with global agendas. Imagine that. So big tech actively censors viewpoints that challenges things like global health mandates, right? During the 2020 stuff, any dissent from WHO guidelines was often banned on social platforms, even though we know they were right now. It didn't matter to them whether they were right then. Truth didn't matter. They just shut you down. So they deplatform voices against the climate change narrative or critical of international institutions. Essentially, big tech has become an enforcer of the one world narrative. We might mention how the World Economic Forum, which is another elite front, openly partners with tech giants to implement things like digital IDs, certain passports, and the so-called Great Reset, which envisions by 2030 a world where you'll own nothing and be happy and eat bugs and whatever else. Carbon butter. What the heck even is that? As soon as I hear that, I think Soylent Green. A scenario of global socialism, digital feudalism, eerily close to what Fagan would call Illuminati rule, because it is. And did his CFR domination of government prediction turn out to be correct? Well, since his time, nearly every U.S. administration has been CFR heavy. For example, the State Department is crawling with CFR members. So is the National Security Council. Presidents from both parties have CFR ties. Bush Sr. was CFR, Clinton, CFR member, Bush Jr., not a member, but VP Cheney and most of his cabinet members were CFR, Obama, CFR advisory. Trump was the anomaly. With few CFR folks, but still had some like Tillerson, and Biden deeply CFR entrenched. The result? Policy continuity. Globalist trade deals, interventionist foreign policy, outsourcing of U.S. sovereignty to international bodies like the Paris Climate Accord, WHO regulations, and Fagan's specific call out that the 66 senators were doing Illuminati bidding. I suspect if he saw the U.S. Senate votes in recent decades, for instance, on horrible spending bills or agreements limiting U.S. independence, he'd find even more traitors now. They're all compromised people. They lie to you. They're probably selected, not elected. And the country needs an enema. And then on the moral and social decay front, was he right about that? Well, the subversion of religion and rise of immorality that Fagan warned has accelerated greatly, right? The 70s onward saw a massive cultural revolution. Divorce is skyrocketing. Abortion legalized. Pornography everywhere and mainstream. The smut that Fagan decried in cinema is now a click away for any child online. The LGBT movement leading to redefinition of marriage, and now even basic gender distinction has been totally blurred. Whether one's stance on these issues, there's no question society underwent some sort of engineered moral transformation, and key global elite documents like the UNESCO guidelines on sex education have pushed values antithetical to traditional Christianity. And it's exactly what Fagan described. Infiltration to preach that traditional beliefs are myths or bigotry, or youth have been secularized. Many identify as no religion. Church attendance in many Western countries has utterly plummeted. And meanwhile, New Age and occult ideas have exploded. A kind of Luciferian light, if you will. And Hollywood and music often glamorize satanic imagery. Right? The One World Church might not be formal yet, but functionally, many people subscribe to a kind of globalist civil religion right now, where earth worship, woke ideology, and state authority are sacred to them. And then principalities and powers unmasked. Fagan dared to call this a satanic plot and said these conspirators literally sold their souls to the devil. In the decades since, we've seen more blatant occult elite conduct come to light. From celebrities dabbling in Satanism, dabbling, right, to politicians attending strange rituals like the Bohemian Grove's Makra sacrifice comes to mind. I wonder if it's even mock. To occult symbolism and pop culture, it's really just outright rituals. And there's a thread that suggests the elite do have dark spiritual proclivities. Modern whistleblowers have even alleged worse, human trafficking and ritual abuse among the powerful. Topics beyond our scope, but it's out there. Put simply, the veil is thinning. Those of us who have spiritual discernment can increasingly see this spiritual evil at work in high places, just as Scripture warned, right? The pure doctrine of Lucifer that Pike mentioned, a world that openly embraces Luciferian values, is nearer than ever. And some tech billionaires openly talk of transcending humanity, transhumanism, which, stripped down, is a rebellion against our God-given limits, or his design. It's a very Luciferian impulse. Now, 50 plus years on, Fagan's lecture reads less like theory and more like our current reality. The conspiracy is no longer even hiding. They speak of a new world order, and they publish plans like the Great Reset, and they celebrate global governance at summits. I mean, sure, they often cloak it in nice language, sustainable development, which means you die, public health, equity, but it's exactly what Fagan warned of: an elite, super rich bankers, CEOs, aristocrats working through front organizations, the UN, the WEF, NGOs, and the media to establish a centralized global system that will control every aspect of our lives, economics, politics, even our belief and biology, with no accountability to the people. All of that infrastructure is there and in operation right now. Now, to end this episode, at Pilgrims Grey Chronicles, we always underscore that this battle isn't merely human. Fagan himself called it a satanic plot multiple times. The Bible confirms that behind earthly tyrants lurk demonic forces. What we're facing is essentially the latest campaign of that ancient war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, often termed the Seed War. Lucifer is just one of the chief instigators, right? And he would like nothing more than to have a one-world government with a self-deifying dictator, a false messiah at head, right? It's precisely how he plans to achieve all of this. Satan at one time offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the world, right? If he would bow down. They were given unto him to give to Jesus by men who abdicated their birthright for whatever he promised them. And it's pretty clear, when he offered it to Jesus, all the kingdoms of the world, if he'd bow down, Jesus refused. But guess what? It doesn't seem like the global elites have accepted that offer. Or they have. And they get power and wealth. And Lucifer gets to work through them towards his end game. And then we have money, greed, wealth, Moloch, Baal, taking our children in various ways that we won't go into here, but you know what I'm talking about. Leviathan, a spirit of chaos, confusion and division at work. And just the spirit of the false messiah in general, right? Called the spirit of Antichrist. It denies the spirit of Jesus and works to substitute a false savior. And we all think it's going to be this evil tyrant. It's not. It's going to be something you see as a messianic, Jesus-like figure performing miracles and rescuing us. And many will turn to him. And he will have authority over every tribe, people, and language and nation. That sounds like one world government to me. And he'll have economic control, right? Revelation 13, 16 through 17. You won't be able to buy or sell without his mark. And people will receive it because they won't think it's this evil mark. They'll think it's a great thing because great things are happening. And then we have the angel of the bottomless pit, right? The wanton destruction wrought by wars and revolutionary terror certainly fits a destroyer like Apollyon or Abaddon. It's like certain leaders are possessed by a spirit of destruction, right? And they bring death en masse without remorse. The good thing is and the hopeful part is we know how the story ends, right? The book of Daniel and Revelation show that this satanic one world empire will be allowed for a short time, the Great Tribulation. But then God Almighty intervenes. In Daniel 2, the prophet interprets King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of an image representing world empires. The final part of the image, feet of iron and clay, can be seen as a final world order. Some see it as a revived Roman Empire, a global coalition, but then a stone cut without hands smashes that image to dust. And God sets up his kingdom, and it shall never be destroyed, nor shall it be left to another people. In Revelation, the Antichrist, or the beast, gathers the kings of the earth in Armageddon. And we did a show on that recently, doing an article written by Derek Gilbert, which more of you need to see. Anyway, that's presumably to fight Christ at his return. And they're defeated. And Satan gets bound. But that doesn't mean that we don't do anything now, right? Knowing the spiritual battle that we are in, we are called to resist evil and to expose it and to occupy until he comes and put on the full armor of God, right? And we can do our part by sharing this kind of info. And maybe we'll have pockets of revival here and there until he returns. Because remember, while most analysts focused on the earthly players, the bankers, politicians, and billionaires, here at Pilgrims Grey Chronicles, we know who's really behind it all. It's those ancient spirits that we've named many times, orchestrating the drama from the shadows. But we also know who's above them, the King of Kings, our Lord Jesus. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So the Luciferians may boast they'll finally enthrone Lucifer as a world ruler, but Psalm 2 tells the Lord laughs at their plans and will set his own king, Jesus, on Zion's hill. So, even Myron Fagan, not explicitly a preacher, ended his lecture on a note of hope and a call to action under God. He says, quote, "With this record, I have provided you with a weapon that will destroy the monster for the love of God, of our country, and of your children. Use it." And that resonates now. Knowledge of the truth is a weapon. Prayer is a weapon. Unity among patriots and Christians and believers is a weapon. The name of Jesus is the ultimate weapon because it's truth. In our time, spreading truth via channels still open, like alternative media like this, personal conversations can still awaken more souls, and we need to wake up more. And awakened, we must pray and act. Pray for God to expose evil, and he is. So much of what was once ridiculed as conspiracy theory is now revealed plainly, right? And why? Because people podcast like myself, and you listen and share it. As a team, we do this, right? Fellow pilgrims. And you can act by resisting tyranny, non-violently saying no to unlawful mandates, voting where it's still fair, if it even is anymore, against globalist puppets, preparing our communities to stand independent with food, energy, and local governance, something we're going to get into soon, about how you can eat and do things in your own home so that you're not poisoned by these people and their ideas. And if the global system tries to force compliance, like we saw during 2020, the states and counties that resisted fared way better. Ultimately, if we do all and still the darkness advances, we don't fear because our hope isn't in earthly structures, but in God's coming kingdom. We might be called to witness amidst persecution, but even that can win souls from the enemy's camp. And one more thing, revival. Often through history, when these kind of schemes loom, God pours out revival to save souls and thwart the enemy's timeline, right? And perhaps a spiritual awakening could yet cut short the globalist Great Reset and give us more time. If not globally, at least individually, right? People can be saved out of deception, and that's a major victory in itself. It's like a scale coming off their eyes. And they probably won't watch much TV anymore either and be deceived. And so while Fagan's content is heavy, we end with faith. The Pilgrims Grey innkeeper might say, "Take heart, dear travelers," right? The evening shadows are long and dark, but the dawn will break. The forces of darkness, bankers, betrayers, and the infernal powers driving them shall not prevail against the church of the living God. Though they plot and rage, our Redeemer lives, and he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. We know the end of the story. Truth triumphs, God's kingdom come will shatter all these empires. Until that day we stand watch, lamps lit with truth and oil of the Spirit, resisting the darkness and rescuing who we can from its grasp. So at the Pilgrims Grey Inn's context, we've been in the shadows, but we carry the lantern of truth and the sword of the Spirit. The innkeeper and all of us here at PGC encourage you to share this knowledge. Become innkeepers of truth in your own circle, right? Hospitably waking others from spiritual slumber. The hour is late, but not too late to act in faith. So, what do you do with this knowledge? Will you tuck it away like a curious trinket, or will you shine it like a beacon? The choice lies with every traveler, right? As for us, we invite you to join our fellowship of truth tellers. So if this night's tale has stirred you, please subscribe to Pilgrims Grey Chronicles. Hit the bell, right? Not the one forged by mortar, mind you. So you won't miss our next fireside gathering every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can share this episode far and wide to wake your neighbors, friends, relatives up. Whisper of it on the road. Shout it from digital rooftops. Let others come out of the cold into the circle of light. And we've plenty of room at the end for soul-seeking truth, right? So please do follow us on the journey each week. Again, we unpack hidden history, connect prophetic dots, and sometimes sing a body hobbit tune, right, to lighten the load. But in all seriousness, your support keeps our lanterns lit. So give this video a thumbs up, or 5-star review if you're listening on a streaming platform. I think we're on all of them, right? Even tavern skeptics are welcome to debate by the hearth as iron sharpens iron. And again, as I've been saying in one forum, I don't delete your comments unless you use foul language. Things that you comment on that have a link with them are automatically held. So I have to approve them, but I don't delete comments. Remember, you are not alone. Across the world, fellow pilgrims are also awakening, and we may be scattered, much like the Dunedain Rangers, but we're united in purpose to guard the innocent, speak truth to power, and watch for the coming king, right? So as you all step back into the world out of the end, carry this flame of knowledge with you, right? Be as wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. For the road ahead needs both wisdom and courage, and challenge the lies, but do so in love and with discernment, because our battle is not against our misled neighbors, but against the dark forces that mislead them. And again, here at Pilgrims Grey, we'll continue to chronicle the unfolding story. Obviously too long at times. I'm going over 2 hours. But, you know, hold your lamp high. Those shadows press. And farewell and Godspeed for now, and may the peace of the true King guard your hearts and minds. And as we say at this old inn, the night may be long, but morning is sure to come, right? So keep that in mind on the road that goes ever, ever on. And again, Godspeed to all of you. See ya.
Travelers, lend me your ear, a tale of heroes who Shadowed woods and mountains steep, their legacy lives where the wild winds sweep. Raise your tankards high and sing for the grey pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Their stories stay. Hail the chronicles of Pilgrims Grey. Through cursed lands where few would tread, the brave walk forth where many fled. Lanterns lit the endless night, their spirits burned a guiding light. Raise your tankards high and sing for the grey pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Their stories stay. Hail the chronicles of Pilgrims Grey. The laughter fades, yet echoes strong in every heart. Their timeless song, mirrors carried on the ale-soaked breeze. Songs as endless as the trees. Raise your tankards